Hello and welcome to Rise of Humanity Personal Development for the Spiritual Warrior. I'm your host, Chris Karamaya, and today I'm very excited to be joined by author and master teacher of Toltec wisdom, Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. He is the author of a series of books, including The 5 Levels of Attachment, and has recently released his latest work, Don Miguel Ruiz's Little Book of Wisdom. Miguel has poured his heart into his work and is truly dedicated to spreading the knowledge of the ancient Toltec around the world. It's a privilege to have you on the show, Miguel. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Chris, thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor for me as well. How are you doing over there?
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. Just prior to the interview, I was watching some of your video content on the internet, and I came across a short 4-minute clip of you and your father talking about love. I'm not sure if you remember that one, but you two seem to have such a wonderful relationship, and obviously such a prominent figure in the world through all his teachings. I'm just wondering, could you describe your relationship to him?
Well, it's a wonderful one. I love my father very much. He's my next door neighbor. Last night I had dinner and we just walk over to each other's house. It's nice. I think my father is just a wonderful man, and I'm very blessed to be his son. And he was always a fun guy to be around. And so we have our disagreements here and there. But at the same time, the majority of the time we agree with a lot of things, and we just have fun and we enjoy, we laugh about a lot of things. And it's been great. Being the eldest son, I got to witness his whole transformation. I remember Dr. Miguel Ruiz. I remember the apprentice that came out of that life experience he had that changed the course of his life. And I remember the man who let go of the medical profession to become a full-time spiritual teacher, and then his trajectory of finding that voice, engaging that voice, developing and evolving. And then I remember him becoming a shaman and teaching, and which to me wasn't that far off, because my grandmother was already a faith healer and a spiritual teacher herself, along with my grandfather, Don Jose Luis Ruiz. So for me, it wasn't that far, something that strange, but I remember the man that he became, and I saw Don Miguel Ruiz, and I seen him through his heart attack and how he handled his heart attack and how he came through that. And heart transplant, man, that guy has gone through a lot of things. So my relationship with him is a very simple one. I enjoy being around him. I enjoy talking to him. Patience is key to someone who changes their mind continuously, but most of the time he changes his mind because everything changes around life. He always says that you have to be flexible with life because life will change plans. And that famous joke: if you want to make God laugh, tell him or her your plans. So with that kind of sense, like he always says, you change plans according to what life has ahead of you. So it's wonderful to see that with my father. But it's wonderful. I enjoy it.
Wonderful, yeah. So, and you began this journey to where you are today from a very young age, under the watchful eye of your father. I mean, what inspired you to start on this journey, and what was your apprenticeship like with him?
Well, my apprenticeship was actually with my grandmother. You can say that when people say that I'm walking in my father's footsteps or in his coattails, whatever, it's actually my grandmother. Both him and I, and my brother, Don Jose Luis Ruiz, my brother, all three of us are following in her footsteps. She's the one that decided to share the Toltec tradition with a community. In San Diego, California, when she reached there, she opened a small little temple where she taught to a community, where she did her faith healings. She gave sermons on Thursdays and Sundays and gave a lot of spiritual advice and did her prayers and meditations and had her students. And I grew up watching that. To me, that was the normal. So you can say that I started at a young age because it was all there from my very first memory of being in this family. Spirituality was there in the form of my grandmother, and from what I hear, her father, my great grandfather, Don Leonardo Ruiz, was the same way. So watching my father transition into that was basically, to me, it felt like he just spent more time with my grandmother and my grandfather than he did at the hospital or office, his medical practice that he had. And you can say that I engaged this tradition because I love my family. I love my father. I love my grandmother and my grandpa. And even though my grandfather died when I was 14 years old, and he still had a huge impact on my life. So when I began my apprenticeship at the age of 14, basically a few months after my grandfather's death, I began my apprenticeship. And my father did a little ceremony up in a little mountain called Madres. Oh, wait, it just blinked on my head. Madre Grande. That's the name of the little mountainside there. And he did the initiation to me and my brother. And my father turned to me and says, I take you on as my apprentice, but for now, your teacher is going to be your grandmother because I want you to do well in school and I want you to learn from her. So I did. So from the age of 14 to somewhere in my mid-20s, I was her translator. That was the main thing of my apprenticeship with my family, was to translate for my grandmother, who didn't speak any English. She only spoke Spanish, but she always had consultations and things in English. So I translated for her. I translated her prayers. I translated her meditations. I translated for the people doing consultations with her, as well as what she said to these people. And I translated her sermons. I translated her lectures. And that was basically it. And it took me a long time to be able to translate for her. One of the biggest lessons I had is that when I began to translate for her, she would always go faster than I could do it. Once inspiration came, she wouldn't stop for anyone. So the translator had to do his or her very best to catch up to her. And sometimes, because the queue of things that I heard kept mounting up, eventually I had to cut it up and let go of a lot of things I didn't say just to catch up to her on real time. So one day she sat me down and said, Miguel, do you know why you're having so much trouble translating for me? And I said to her, Grandma, it's because you're not giving me any time. You're just talking. You're not giving me any time to do this or that. And my grandmother heard my protest, you can say. And then eventually when I finished, she says, the reason why you're having difficulty is that you're not listening to me. You first listen to what I'm saying, but then you translate what I'm saying into English in your mind, and you're translating it as you think it should be. You're basically editing it. And as you're doing it, you're mounting a queue of things that you remember that's ready to be processed by your mind, but eventually your attention goes from what I'm saying to what's in your own mind, and you lose me. Imagine trying to do that with life. Imagine trying to process everything that you're experiencing in life, and by the time you finish processing everything, life already passed by you, and you missed out on the lesson, you missed out on the opportunity, you missed out on the experience. So here's what I want you to do, Miguel. From now on, when you translate for me, I want the voice that's inside your head to be my voice. And it's going to be in Spanish. But here's the thing. When you open your mouth, it's going to be in English. Because here's the thing. You already know the language. You master it. You know how to do it. So have trust in yourself, but listen. Listen to what I'm saying. And practice. And that's how my grandmother began to teach me how to meditate. Because at first I had to learn how to not only quiet the mind, you can say that I had to cut out every distraction. So at first it was closing my eyes. That was the easy part, because when I close my eyes, I'm not distracted by the things I see. Then, once I mastered that, it was about not giving attention to the things I hear, because as soon as I hear something, I wanted to open my eyes and see what was causing that noise, and I would lose her. So it took me a long time to learn to listen with my eyes closed and not listening to my sounds around me. And then it came to where I had to ignore or cut out the sounds in my own mind, which was the most difficult thing, to cut out my thoughts. Because every time I had a thought like, oh, I think I forgot the turn off the lighter and the stove or something like that, then I would lose her. So any thought would distract me and I would lose her. So it took me a long time, many years, to be able to translate for her. And I got to the point where I was able to translate for her in real time. She would say the opening letters to a word, and I would already be translating into Spanish. There'd be at times where we both talked simultaneously. And that's the way my grandmother taught me how to meditate, to focus my attention by cutting out a lot of the distractions and develop a discipline of attention. So you can say that's a way that one of the ways my grandmother taught me. So by the time my father got around to increase my apprenticeship with the family, I had already graduated from college. I already done that course with my grandmother. And then, mind you, I had gone to my father's classes. I had gone to power journeys with him. I had worked with him. It wasn't that he wasn't around. He did teach me, but the main professor was my grandmother. So when it was time to go to my father, it was more of a practicum, it's like put into practice. It's the equivalent of him, oh, you want to learn how to swim? Push me into the pool and says, swim. But Dad, I can't swim. Miguel, swim. Miguel, but Dad, I can't swim. But Dad, Miguel, look at what you're doing. Your head's above water. You're treading water. You're swimming. I'm like, oh, it may be doggy paddling, but I am swimming. And all of a sudden, I swam all across the pool with a little doggy paddle, which slowly but surely I developed into a nice stroke and a nice kind of thing. But that's the way my father taught me. So you can say that I began my apprenticeship. What got me into this was first and foremost the love for my family, the love for my grandmother, the love for my father. And little by little, I began to practice it. Now, mind you, I did rebel against it because as a teenager, what does it have to do with my life? I saw this practice as history. It's like something that belonged in a history book or in a museum. What does it have to do with my life? And I listened because I love my grandmother, and I practiced it because I love my grandmother. But there was always that part of me that, well, what does that have to do with me? How do I apply this in my life? And when you graduate from college and the bubble bursts, because when you graduate from your studies and you're no longer working for grades, the bubble bursts and real life happens. And all of a sudden, you're not working for grades. You're not even sure what you're working for. Some people work for money. Some people work for a position in a career or whatnot. But all of a sudden, you realize that life can go in any direction in life. And life is beginning to teach you. You can say that was the key. At first, my grandmother was my teacher. Then my father was my teacher. But then the real teacher came, and that was life. Some would say it's God. But I like saying life because it's the constant interaction with everything that surrounds me. So that's how I began to develop my own voice. And all of a sudden, it wasn't me repeating verbatim what my grandmother would say, like I did in my translations, or what my father would teach as in my interpretations, what he's saying. But all of a sudden, it became my own experiences, and my father and my grandmother's teachings were there as an instrument to guide my decisions. But my decisions, with its consequences, ultimately became my teacher. And I guess you can say that's the path of my apprenticeship.
Yes, amazing story. I can completely relate to what you're saying about life becoming the teacher, because like with me starting this podcast, it suddenly everything becomes very real. I'm not being paid by a boss to do it. I don't have set hours. It's me very much with the world and with life, interacting and really learning just what life's all about. So it's a big jump, but it's an amazing way to grow. So could you just explain to the listeners then, what is a Toltec?
Sure. Well, the word Toltec is a Nahuatl word that in English means artist. I am an artist. If I translate the phrase the Toltec art of transformation into 100% English, it means the artist's path of transformation. And the the canvas for my work of art is my life. And my instruments that I'm going to use to create that work of art, it's this body, it's this mind, it's my intent, my will, my yes and my no's. These are the instruments by which I create the work of art that is constantly evolving with every stroke, with every decision I make, is constantly changing. Now that's the principle of the tradition, which is an oral tradition, which goes to what the Toltecs were as a civilization. As a civilization, they were a Mesoamerican community that existed, or culture that existed in the pre-Columbian days, and ceased to exist either with the expansion of the Aztecs or the expansion of the Spanish. Whatever it is, when you lose a central capital or a central focus of a community, a civilization ends. So it became an oral tradition where the descendants of each community taught it in their own unique way. Some towns, some pueblos teach it exactly as it was over 500 years ago. There's people out there that I know that are teaching it or trying to teach it as it was. And then there's the teachings like my family that evolved it with every new generation. I just recently posted a picture on my social media of my great-great-grandfather, Don Ezequiel, and his son, my great-grandfather, Don Leonardo, and his daughter, Madre Sarita, my grandmother, and my father. And that's the lineage that I know of this tradition. Each one of them taught in their own unique way, and they taught according to the life and times and trials and tribulations of their own present moment. Don Ezequiel being the very first Mexican because his father was born in the New Spain, and Don Ezequiel was the first one to be born under the New Republic. Then his son, Don Leonardo, being growing up during the Porfiriato and the Mexican Revolution. And then his daughter, Madre Sarita, to grow up in the 1930s. She was born in 1910, so she grew up in what we know as modern Mexico. And then her son, Don Miguel, grew up in the 60s. He was born in 1952, but the world that shaped him was the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s. And the adult of the most recent 50 years, 60 years. And then me and my brother, who grew up in the States, and reflecting that world and the world of pop music and art and all that kind of thing. So each one of us taught in our own unique way, and we adapted. And something my grandmother told my brother Jose: if you practice the Toltec tradition exactly as the way I did it or your father did it, then you're killing the tradition, because you're not allowing that tradition to actually blossom in your heart. And when it blossoms in your heart, it's because you're living life. And because you're living life, it'll look dramatically different to your father, to me, to my father and my grandfather. It's always evolving because life is evolving. Life is always changing. That's why you can say when I was a teenager, it felt like it belonged in a museum, because those old concepts, the idea of the ethereal egg or the assemblage point, all that kind of thing, like, what does that have to do with me? But then life happened, like we were talking about earlier. So from that point of view, that's where the Toltec tradition really is embodied now. It's not a civilization or a culture. It's just a philosophy that remains. And you can say it's interpreted as the practitioner engages life. But ultimately, it comes down to the same thing. I am the artist of my own life. And the work of art that I create is my experience of life, my dream of life.
Wonderful. So, you talked about when you were growing up and college and things that you were questioning, what does this have to do with me? And you talk about does it belong in a museum? So obviously from all the work that you've done up to now, how can the ancient wisdom of the Toltec assist us in this modern day world?
Well, in the same way as the Maori's tradition and the tradition of South Asia and Europe and Africa and throughout Latin America and North America and throughout the world, really. We all come from ancestors who experienced life in their own unique way, and they put it into a language they could understand. So the Toltecs just happened to experience life from that valley in Mexico and that world near the Tropic of Cancer, and they experienced the flow of nature there, and they put it into the language that they knew. That theirs before the pre-Columbian, before Columbus showed up. It was a world of Maya and Olmecs and Teotihuacans and Chichimecas and Tarahumaras and Texcoco and all the civilizations that were around them. Like they were separated by a desert in the north, a jungle at the center, and two oceans, a gulf and an ocean to each side. So you can say that there was a good little square area where the civilization blossomed there. Now, they put it into a language they could understand. They did their best, and some things worked, some didn't work. And if we apply it and we adapt it, as the generations since have expanded those barriers, has expanded those boundaries, we now live in an age where we're not bound by such physical, geographic limitations like it did for them. We are able to learn from the ancestors from all around the world. For example, the conversation you and I are having at this very moment is the example of that. You being, I believe you're in New Zealand, right?
No,
You're in the
UK.
UK. Sorry. You're in the UK. You're in the UK right now with your ancestors, with the Druids and the people who came from that and the experience of that grew up in that area. Your ancestors had a lot of information that allows you to apply today. Some of them relevant, some of them not. So the Toltec in the same way. So from that point of view, how our ancestors, and in my case the Toltec, have for us is that they give us the knowledge that allowed them to survive in their time. Some of it is relevant, some of it is not. Some of it we're recreating because, like I said before, the microphone, the scope of information has gone beyond the limitations of geography. We can interact in real time with humanity and learn from one another. There was a time where people had to look for the teachings of Yogananda. Like it was the first exposure they had was George Harrison sharing his music and the Maharishi, that kind of thing. And then nowadays, you don't have to look for those little weird bookstores. You can log on, and like you did at the beginning of the show, you said you saw some videos of mine that people have posted all around, and that's the beauty. That's the thing. So imagine being in an orchard in a field of apple trees, for example. You're walking through this orchard, and each one of these trees has apples. Some of those apples are incredibly good, very nutritious, and some of them have already begun to rot in the vine because they were infected by a virus or a worm or something. So it's up to us to go through each tree, and if we need to be nourished, we will reach up and grab the apple that will nourish us. And that's going to be throughout our path along that orchard. That every single tree has something to teach us, something that will nurture us. Well, imagine instead of a tree, a grove of trees, it's a grove of teachers from different traditions. And you can pick and choose the ones that are relevant to you. That's the thing. It has to be relevant. It has to resonate with you because I can give you the whole tradition, but the key that's going to help you are those expressions, those words, those phrases, those movements that resonate with you. And when it resonates with you, it means that it has something that's relevant in your life. And when it's relevant in your life, you can see how you can apply it. And the key there is that the way you know it's relevant in your life is that you know yourself. So it always comes down to you. If you don't know yourself, you don't know which apple is going to be good for you because you don't know. You don't know yourself. So you're going to grab apples that may or may not be good for you because you don't know you. But if you know yourself and you get to know What makes you feel happy? What makes you feel angry? What makes you feel good, glad? What makes you nourished? What makes you you? Then with that awareness, you will grab the apple that you know will make you happy. It's like if you see a Honeycrisp apple or a Fuji apple or or I forgot the name of the any apples. You know, you're gonna look, which one do you like, the Honeycrisp or the other Fuji or the other granny one, the granny apple, whatever it's called, or a sour one. I mean, you know which one you like. You know, some apples you don't like the taste. You don't like green apples, but you may love the taste of a Granny Smith. For you, that requires to know yourself. And you can say that's the point of the Toltec tradition, to know yourself, to help you let go of all those beliefs that corrupts knowledge, that corrupts your beliefs, that corrupted that apple, and let go of it. You can say that the main problem that the Toltec tradition faces is what we know as domestication, with its end result being conditional love. It's the thing that subjugates our will. It's the thing that makes us blind, that doesn't allow us to see beyond the tips of our nose, that we corrupt. For example, my father wrote the book, Four Agreements, but if we're so attached to our domestication, which is domestication is a system of reward and punishment by which we model the behavior of an individual. If you live up to the expectation, you get a reward. And if you don't live up to the expectation, you get the punishment. And since we are emotional beings that experience the full spectrum of emotions that we feel, that we engage, that's impacted our life, then that reward feels like acceptance, which feels like love. And the punishment feels like rejection and the lack thereof of love, with its end result being conditional love. And with that conditional love, we begin so attached to them that it doesn't allow us to see beyond the tips of our nose. And we begin to corrupt even the Four Agreements, for example. I can use the Four Agreements to domesticate myself, to say the perfect version of me is to be the perfect version of Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. Now, to be perfect is to be completely free of any flaw. So if I don't take things personally, if I don't make assumptions, if I always do my best, I forgot the fourth agreement. Oh no, how can I call myself Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. if I don't know the four agreements? And there is that diatribe of judgment, that diatribe of rejecting myself, punishing myself for not living up to that image of perfection that comes in. Punishing myself because I am not that perfect image of Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., who doesn't take things personal, always does his best, is impeccable with his word, and doesn't make assumptions. But I forgot the fifth agreement. Oh no, the fifth agreement, be skeptical but learn to listen. And if I fall short on that, then there's the diatribe again. So the telltale sign that I'm using the Four Agreements as an instrument of domestication is to judge myself for taking things personal, or judge myself for making assumption. At that point, we've turned the Four Agreements and converted them into the four conditions of our personal freedom. So you can say the four conditions are the complete distortion or the complete corruption of the Four Agreements. And if you translate that to other things, the teachings of Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson, Louise Hay, Dr. Wayne Dyer, Jesus, Buddha, Siddhartha, Mohammed, psychology, psychiatry, Alcoholics Anonymous. Humanity has created all these beautiful traditions that allows us to let go of conditional love, but we're so attached to that system that we will apply it in everything and thus corrupt all of them. And you can see how all those beautiful teachings of all these great masters, of all these great teachers, especially the traditional ones, the big ones in our world, how we've corrupted them to such a degree that we use them to justify killing one another or rejecting one another. And that's the corruption of it. When you see it from that point of view, we can even corrupt science, of course. Fashion, beauty, love, music. We can corrupt all these things. So if we become aware of that, if we have a moment of clarity, thus we have a choice. We can either continue to believe that in those corruptions and that distortion, or we make the choice to let go of it, to let go and begin to clean it up. And that's where we begin to know ourselves, to get to know who we are. And it first starts by accepting the truth that I am the sum of all the choices I've ever made. That at this very moment I'm the youngest I will ever be. So like an Alcoholics Anonymous that has the people say, hello, my name is so and so and I'm an alcoholic. Well, hello, my name is Miguel Angel Ruiz Jr. and I do take things personally. I do make assumptions. Sometimes I'm not impeccable with my word. Sometimes I take things personally. I do make assumptions. Sometimes I don't do my best. Just ask my wife. She's my witness. But it's that moment where I stop pretending to be something I am not and I accept myself for who I am. And I stop pretending to be something I'm not. And that's, you can say, the difference between conditional love, domestication, and unconditional love. Conditional love with its domestication is only wanting to see what we want to see and trying to live up to that expectation, which means that we're constantly rejecting ourselves for who we are. But unconditional love is the willingness to see ourselves for who we are at this very moment, accept the truth that this is who I am at this very moment. But since I'm still the youngest I will ever be, I can still change and evolve and grow. So from that point of view, that's where the tradition, that tradition, the Toltec, can help us, or at least in this modern world. Because one thing that hasn't changed is the individual who lives life and has the choice of either loving themselves unconditionally or conditionally. So when we begin to heal that, we're able to recognize which apples really do help us. And in reality, all the apples can help us. But one of them is always going to be can resonate with us at that moment in time. For example, someone can read the Four Agreements, and in that first reading, they're going to get an aha moment. And the second time they read it, the book's going to look different because they've done some process and they've changed their point of view. And then again and again and again, sometimes something completely different will pop up for them. That's because we're ready for that. We're always ready and evolving and changing. And that readiness tends to always change. So what resonates with us may resonate today or may not resonate at all today, but it might in the future. But the constant is you. So that's, you can say, what I've learned from the Toltec tradition, or at least in the practice of it, that I am a living being that has a full capacity to engage life. And the way we let go of conditional love is for us to forgive ourselves for ever saying yes to it in the first place, for ever believing it.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Yeah. The domestication idea is obviously, it's very powerful and obviously affects our personal freedom in a big way if we don't keep it in check. But there's a counterpart of domestication that you talk about, which is attachment. Could you explain a bit in detail how that relates to domestication?
Well, an attachment is to make something that's not a part of us a part of us, by investing of ourselves emotionally or intellectually or energetically to something. At least that's what I've seen a definition. But an attachment, you can say that an attachment to a material object is different because, okay, when we're attached to a material thing, it's not the actual object that we're attached to. We're attached to its meaning, what it represents, to its idea. So we really don't get attached to material things. We get attached to the beliefs that go with that material thing. So we get attached to beliefs, to ideas. Now here's the thing. The truth exists whether we believe it or not. That's the thing about the truth. It exists with or without me. A belief only exists for as long as I say yes to it. As soon as I change that yes into a no, it ceases to exist, which means a belief is an illusion. Some beliefs reflect the truth as is, and you can say that it's a pure reflection of the truth. Some of it is completely distorted and corrupted, and it's what we know as the lie or the illusion, but in all of it, it's the illusion. So an attachment is that we invest so much of ourselves to that belief that it begins to control who we are. So you can say the easiest way to internalize a belief is to domesticate ourselves with that belief. You say to root for this football team or root for that other team. If you grew up in Manchester, if you grew up in London, or you grew up in Newcastle, and you attach yourself to those beliefs, and even then, you might still have the smaller team that you root for instead of the bigger team. But they all come with rules, and you define yourself by those rules, and you know yourself by those rules, and you will love by those rules, and you base your full identity on that. And the more attached we get to that, the more that belief controls who you are. It controls who you love. It controls who your choices are. It controls those things. Now, I use sports because it's not as complicated as politics or religion. If we translate that to politics and religion, holy smokes, it gets a lot more complicated, man. But that's why I like using sports, because in the sport, you can see that there's a complete separation between what happens in the pitch and what happens in the stands. There's a line that separates it. So I like using the levels of attachment to explain that. So imagine level 1, the authentic self. I am an individual regardless of what I think or what I know. I know I'm alive. So I can go to any stadium anywhere in the world and I'll enjoy that game. At level 2, preference. Well, after watching that game, I choose, there's a certain emotion to watching football if I invest of myself in it. So I will look at that team that's in front of me and I'll look for things that remind me of me, my neighborhood, my last name, a player number, and also, or the color of the team. And I like it, so I'm going to root for that team. It doesn't mean I'm going to root against the other team, but I'm going to root for that team. So the difference is that, and this level 1 and level 2, and when the referee blows his or her whistle to start or end the game, when a game ends, anything that happened on the pitch had nothing to do with me, including during. The whistle was blown to start the game, and I enjoyed it. And since I invested of myself a bit more, I enjoyed it as a roller coaster. I enjoyed the highs, I enjoyed the lows. But when the referee blows his or her whistle, either the team won or lost, it doesn't matter who to me. I enjoy the ride and I say congratulations to them or poor you next time. Level 3, identity. Imagine that referee blowing the whistle, but the difference is that instead of getting up and going on your day and the result of the game doesn't impact you in any way, shape, or form, now you stand up and you have the jersey of that team, and that team defines you. Now, at level 3, you're still able to be friends with an Arsenal fan or a Man U fan or anything like that, because you see, hey, you like football, I like football too. Let's have a beer, let's have a pint, and I can see why your team can win. It's friendly. You find an identity simply allows you to recognize people who like same things as you. And you can say that the line between what happens in the stands and what happens on the field, as these 3 levels increase, gets slightly blurred a little bit. At level 1, it's completely defined. At level 2, it's still defined, but I allowed my emotions to cross that line. And at level 3, with my shirt, that line begins to blur a bit more, because if the team wins, I'm happy for the rest of the week. I've got bragging rights. And if my team loses, then I'm going to be sad for the rest of the team, and I have to concede to the other team and its fans. But I won't punch them. I'm just going to say, hey, congratulations to you. At level 4, though, internalization, where I begin to domesticate myself with it. My attachment grows even more. Forget about that pint. I'm not going to share a pint with them. I'm going to judge them. I'm going to say why their team is terrible and why the referee was bought. We can't win. We were good. So at that point, there's rules. If the team wins, then I win, and I personally have bragging rights. We won. If the team loses, then we lost, and the depression, the sadness gets even worse. But the team, Barcelona has more than a club, más que un equipo. There's rules to be a fan. There's rules of who you accept, who you like, who you don't like, and the chance you have to know all of them. And if you don't, you're a wannabe, you're a sellout, you're just a poser. And if instead of buying that person a beer, I'm gonna argue with them and say to them that your team is terrible, mine is better. Even if we lose, we're still better because we have integrity. And you can see already the battle, the arguments of trying to live up to an image. And then at level 5, fanaticism. Those arguments turn into punches and kicking. Yeah, there's definite rules by which I will live my life. I domesticate myself to that point of view. It's the complete corruption of the game. You can say at level 4, whereas level 1, level 2, and level 3, the line between the pitch and you is defined, even though a little blurry at level 3. At level 4, there's no division. I'm on the field. I project myself on each one of the players. It's like Wayne Rooney scoring a goal. That's me scoring, or Cole, or anyone like that. All of a sudden, it's me on the pitch, and I'm the 12th man. And at the level 5, even the players have to live up to the standards. Everyone has to live their standards. Why have someone who doesn't want to be in my team? Like, why do I want an Arsenal as a friend? Why do I want someone from Newcastle or Manchester or whatnot? And what part of London are you from? And which team do you support? Oh, those teams. And that point, that's where fanaticism, where a shirt or a symbol becomes more important than my own life. And if it's more important than my own life, then it's definitely more important than yours, where we begin to see human beings, not as in their humanity as I would at level 1, 2, and 3, but as the personification of an idea that I either agree with or disagree with. And if I disagree with you, I'm going to domesticate you with punches until you get it right. And if you follow the same jersey as I have, if you have the same crest as I do, then you better live up to the standard if you want my acceptance. And that same thing is happening inside my own head, and I'm living that. So I like using sports because that line that separates us is quite clear. But if I use that in politics or religion, man, this conversation, you would have stopped listening to me somewhere around level 3. So to me, an attachment, the more attached we are to a belief, to an idea, the less we lose our will, our free will, but the more we love ourselves conditionally, and the intensification of our domestication gets to such a point that it impacts our life, and it also impacts our relationships with the people. Because here's the thing, if you're a fan of one team or the other, the only thing that separates or dictates that friendship is that jersey. You don't even know that person. You don't know their history. You don't know where they come from. You don't know their good qualities. All you see is a crest. And my grandmother used to teach me that, about the more attached you are, the more in hell you are. She was trying to describe Dante's Inferno to me. I've read the book. And I saw it when I went to a game here and when I lived in San Diego, between the arch rivals in Mexico, which is Chivas and Pumas, the team from Guadalajara versus the team from Mexico City. And I was surrounded by, because my family's from Guadalajara, so I was surrounded by all the Guadalajara fans in red and white, with and the yellow shirt of a fan of America, of the Eagles of Mexico City, came in, and everyone started yelling at him, started insulting him, throwing things, and eventually someone started punching him. They don't know the guy. They don't know who he is. All they see is the jersey. So at that point, the jersey becomes more than the individual. We can say that we lost sight of the humanity of an individual because we only see him as the personification of an idea, of a belief. And the same thing we're doing to ourselves. That's the diatribe. That's the judgment. That's the thing that when I talk about the 4 conditions, that violent thing that happens in our mind, that diatribe of judgment that I illustrated earlier, happens in our minds. Now, translate that. Translate this to your everyday life. Translate that to the way you dress. Translate that to your spirituality. Translate that to your music. Translate that to your fashion. Translate that to your status. Translate that to your neighborhood. And all of a sudden, you'll see it. For example, if my definition of the perfect version of myself is to be 170 pounds, weighing 170 pounds, with a full set of hair and being 27 years old, and I look at myself in the mirror, and that's just not the truth. I'm 41 years old, my hair is thinning, and I weigh 190. And since I didn't live up to that image of perfection, then I'm going to judge myself. I'm going to call myself, you fat bleep. You bald fat bleep. You old bald fat bleep. And that diatribe that happens, that I'm judging myself from looking at myself in the mirror, is punishing myself for not being or not living up to that image or that standard. And that's what domestication is. So it's conditional love. It only sees what I want to see. And the work that we do is to let go of that. You can say that the work that I do as a teacher in the Toltec tradition is to help people heal from the wounds of conditional love left in our life. And when we heal those wounds, we can scale back on the levels of attachment. We can go from level 5 to 4, from 4 to 3, and from 3 to 2, and then be at 1, 2 throughout the rest of our life. But that's the thing. We're always going to go up and down, and it's always a choice. So that to me is what an attachment does with domestication. The more we're attached to a belief, the more we'll use that belief as the model by which we will domesticate ourselves by.
Yeah. And you talk about the obviously religion and politics is a very complicated subject. I'm wondering just how would this apply to romantic relationships? Because I know that's obviously an area which a lot of people experience attachment, and then maybe when they go through a breakup, they realize how much they were placing their happiness on someone else. I mean, would say like around a 2, is that kind of like a healthy number for a relationship?
I would say that the majority of the people in the world are level 3 and 4. You know, we're it's hard for us to imagine ourselves without an identity. It's actually almost the one condition the whole community of what we call in our tradition the dream of the planet, which is just another word to describe the human community that we are in full. The one condition it has is I need to know who you are. So we're always attached to an identity. It's how we have a voice in this world. Level 4, you can say a lot of people domesticate themselves. Very few are level 5, but they're very loud. Fanaticism is very loud, but they're still the minority, as well as level 1 and 2 to a certain degree. But level 1, that's the thing. When I first started, I used to think that the Pope or the Dalai Lama or Yogananda, they're the examples of a level 1. But in reality, everyone's at level 1. Everyone's the authentic self. We're just so attached to our beliefs that we can't see it. So in regards to relationship, you can say let's just say that love is the energy that creates a bond. Let's just say that's what it is. It's the energy that allows us to have a bond with someone, this emotional union, you can say. It's a love we have for our father, our mother, our brother, our sister, and our beloved, in romance. So let's say that if we grew up with domestication, that we are so attached to believe what love should be, then the fights we're having with the people in our life is domesticating the other to live up to the image that we think they should be. It's like Don Quixote projecting the mask of Dulcinea onto a young maiden that works at the bar. She's the barmaid at this tavern, but his attachment to his beliefs distorts so much of it that he doesn't see the woman that she is. He projects the image of a princess named Dulcinea because he's doing that to himself. His name is Alonso Quijano, but he prefers the illusion, so he calls himself Don Quixote. So we have an attachment to this, and we domesticate each other to that image. We have a strong attachment what love should be with the happily ever after. You can say that a girl will domesticate her boyfriend to be Prince Charming, and the boyfriend will domesticate her to be Scarlett Johansson or something like that. Or she tries to domesticate him to be David Beckham or something like that. I'm behind on my time, sorry. But the thing about it is that we domesticate each other, and we try to domesticate the other to live up to an image that they are not. And most of the fights that couples have is who's going to domesticate who, because whoever controls the yes of the relationship controls the relationship. So to love someone unconditionally is to see them for who they are, to respect their yes and their no. To respect someone, for example, for me to respect my wife, is to respect her capability of saying no just as much as her yes. Her no is just as powerful as her yes. And she has every capacity to go in any direction in life. That's letting her have that personal freedom. But here's the thing, I can't give what I do not have. In order for me to give that respect, that peace, it starts with me. It's like saying, in order for me to learn to say namaste, I first learned to practice to honor my own son. Because in order for me to say the son in me honors the son in you, I first learn to honor my own son. So when I say the son in me honors the son in you, I know what that feels like. So to show respect to another individual, especially my beloved, I first learned to have respect for myself, that my no is just as powerful as my yes. Because here's the thing, my beloved, my wife, is only with me because she said yes. And in any given moment, she can change her no. The relationship only exists while we both say yes. If we both change our minds and say no at the same time, that makes things easy. But if she says no or I say no, then it gets complicated. It's you're trying to convince someone. So when couples ask for my advice in relationships, I always ask them, do you guys want to stay together? Do you want to be together? If both of them say yes, then the rest of it is easy because the motivator to have that bond is there. If one of us says yes and the other one says no, then that's complicated because you're basically trying to convince someone else to change that no to a yes. And that's where all the power struggle will happen. Mm-hmm. It's easy when they both say no. So love is there because you both say yes to that love, to this relationship. That's respect. But the person who's more afraid of the other person's will, of them changing that yes into a no, the person who's more afraid is either going to try to domesticate the other or they're going to subjugate their will. It's called imposing and subjugation. When you impose your will into someone, you cross that line of respect as you try to control them. And the other person will relent when they don't trust themselves, because that's the only way you control the will of another individual. You make them or convince them that to judge themselves, to not trust themselves, to doubt themselves. And when they doubt themselves, they give away power. So most of the battles you see in romance, the problems, is that they want to control the other one. And the best way to control them is to make them doubt who they are. Whether it's in a relationship between couples or family or friends or whatnot. Boy, girl, boy, girl, whatever. In that relationship of power, someone tries to impose their will, and someone who doesn't have their trust will be subjugated, which means every parasite will find his or her perfect host. But the majority, what we see is a battle. Who is going to domesticate who? Who is going to subjugate the other? And that's what we normally see. Unfortunately, that's what we see in some relationships, that when we ask about relationships and the problems in regards to domestication, that's what it is. But to end that war, it starts with that respect for yourself, to respect your beloved, which means to respect yourself, because you are the constant in every relationship you are in. You are the constant in every relationship you have ever been in. So if you have conditional love for yourself, then you've got nothing but conditional love to give, which means you only have domestication to share. But if you've healed yourself, if you begin to respect yourself, to love yourself, to take care of yourself, then that is what you're able to give to someone else. Then you become the constant opportunity for unconditional love in relationships. Because the moment you're willing to see your own humanity is what allows you to see the humanity in other people. And then love looks dramatically different from that point of view.
Yes. Very powerful. Thank you for that. So My ultimate goal with this podcast is to create a movement of what I call spiritual warriors, people who are willing and ready to step up and change the world for the greater good of humanity. So, for the spiritual warriors that are listening to this, firstly, what is your best tip on how we can improve ourselves today?
The best tip to enjoy being you. Enjoy being you. You are the sum of all the choices you've ever made. Every choice you've ever made has led you to this point. But at the same time, right now, this very moment, you are the youngest you will ever be. So how do you want to live the rest of your life? If you've seen the things that doesn't make you happy, that doesn't make you feel comfortable, then change it. My father always says, help me to change the world. Not the world out there, not that physical world, but the world inside your own head. Because that's where we change it. We only control to the tips of our own fingers. We don't control the will of another. And we're used to trying to domesticate other people to try to make them fit. Wouldn't it be easier if everyone practiced the four agreements? At that point, that's where our temptation to domesticate someone else is. And at that point, that's where respect goes out the window. That's where the four conditions comes in. Well, if I don't want the four conditions to come in, I first stop it in my own life. I stop domesticating myself and corrupting spirituality. I stop corrupting the four agreements in my case and start using it as an instrument. The four agreements. An agreement is a word that represents the moment of saying yes to something. That's what an agreement is, the action of saying yes. So an agreement is the four agreement. Don't take things personally. Don't make assumptions. Always do your best. Be impeccable with the word. These are instruments that inform your choice, but you're the one making the choice. You are free to take things personal, and you're free not to take it personal. That's what personal freedom is, to be able to be free to say yes to either one. And when you say yes to not taking things personal with that awareness, that's when that agreement becomes alive, because you used it as an instrument that informs your choice, and you make the choice, but you're the one who made the choice. So at that point, forgive yourself for ever saying yes to conditional love. Remember what Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can make me feel inferior without my consent. If you make yourself inferior or someone says something about you, you've given them permission. You've given consent. And the way we did it is by agreeing with them, by believing it. Well, forgive yourself for ever believing those beliefs that says you're not worthy of love. Forgive yourself for ever being tempted to domesticate someone else to your point of view. Respect them, just as you respect yourself. And when you begin to heal that in your own mind, then we become those warriors, because we're not a warrior because we're at war. We're a warrior because we have the discipline to be aware. There's that beautiful story of two wolves. That it's an old Cherokee, but it's really more ancient than that. A grandfather takes his grandson to the fire pit to tell him stories, to do an evening of oral tradition and share the tradition from one generation to another. You tell stories. The grandfather says to the grandchild, inside of all of us there lives two wolves. One, a wolf of anger, prejudice, hate, and selfishness. The other, a wolf of love and compassion and, well, love. The grandchild thinks about it, hears it, and eventually asks the question, grandfather, if I make them fight, which one will win? And the grandfather says, the one you feed. Now here's the thing, when I grew up, I always thought, well, you naturally feed the wolf of love. But then I realized that loving yourself unconditionally is the willingness to see yourself as the whole of me, to accept the whole of me, which means I am also the wolf of hate. I am both wolves. To love myself unconditionally is to accept both sides. So I've changed my answer. The answer to me is that I feed both wolves. But the difference is I won't make them fight. The war ends with me. And the war ends because I choose not to reject myself. And at that point, the war ends. and peace comes within me.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. And the second question I was going to ask is, I think you kind of touched on it there, is what would be the best way for the spiritual warrior to contribute to the rise of humanity? But I think, did you make the point that the best way, your father says, to work on yourself?
Yeah, heal yourself.
Trying to change the physical world.
Yeah, it's basically like, I'm going to quote Michael Jackson here. I'm starting with the man in the mirror.
Yes.
Well, that's the thing. This quote, I don't know who it comes from, but it says, "When be the change you want to see in the world." I think it was Gandhi. So,
yes,
if you want to see that change, start with yourself. Look at the things that trigger you. Look at the things that make you go angry. Look at the things that trigger you to try to domesticate someone else, and you'll find the things that you use to domesticate yourself. And when you see that, you have a choice to continue to believe it or to let it go. So a moment of clarity without any action is just a thought that passes in the wind. But a moment of clarity followed by action becomes a pivotal moment in our life. So it's your choice. Unconditional love is a choice.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So, Miguel, how can the listeners find out more about your books and your teachings?
You can go to our website at miguelruiz.com or miguelruizjr.com. That's miguelruizjr.com. That's our home base. Of course, we're on social media, Facebook, and all that kind of things. Part of what happens now in the days is one of the things that our publishers ask us to do. But our websites are our home base. It's where we're at. And you can probably find our books and wherever your favorite bookstore is sold, I guess. I think in the UK, our publisher is Hay House.
Okay, yeah. Hay House. Nice. So, Miguel, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show today. I'm very grateful to you for sharing this knowledge and wisdom and all the work that you are doing for the listeners. So,
thank you so much, Chris, for the opportunity. Thank you so much for allowing me to engage you and hang out with you today.
That's great. Thank you. So that is all for today, folks. I hope you have thoroughly enjoyed this episode of Rise of Humanity. And look out for Miguel's books and his website in the show notes. I'll be putting those in there, and consider going out and getting one and implementing this amazing knowledge in your own life. So that's all for now. Until next time. Bye-bye.